Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Stratford Public Schools Budget Workshop. It is Wednesday, February 9th, and we will begin our meeting at 6:30 p.m. Welcome, everyone, and Pam, if you wouldn't mind. Thank you, Ms. Meiji.
Good evening, everyone. I'm going to try to speak nice and loud, so if you can't hear me, please let me know. Our focus this evening is going to be on salaries and benefits, and followed by the curriculum budget, those areas of your budget books, and we'll direct you accordingly as we work through this. I do have a few brief slides that I'd just like to go through with you to kind of give you an overview of our those two areas of the budget and perhaps where our discussions may lead us. And I just ask that you hold questions until the end. Again, I will be brief, I promise. So I think it'll just be a helpful guide for you as we begin. So in your book, you have this summary, and I just highlighted salaries and benefits. Those are the 100s, and it would be tab 100 in your book, and the 200s, which are benefits. As you can see, our overall increase in salaries projected for fiscal year 23 is about 2%. And it's important to note that that is net of the proposed staff reductions, as well as an estimated $100,000 savings in retirement. And that's really an early number, and quite honestly, we do have some intent that's not definitive at this point. Also, as you can see, our increase for benefits is about 7% in total. We talked about that briefly on Monday evening, and we are basing that on our renewal number with NAPA, which is really helpful to have at this point. And as we discussed on Monday evening as well, part of the superintendent's proposal included these recommended staff reductions. And while some information was provided the other evening, Dr. Gator will add a little during her presentation as well. And of course, we'll chat about any questions with regard to this area. But for now, I'll just remind everyone that these savings are projected in the total budget presented to you at 4.6%. This slide is most important in that it reflects the fact that salaries and benefits total more than 3/4 of the Stratford Public Schools budget. That number, along with other contractual and fixed costs, such as transportation, utilities, special education, and tuition, really leaves the board with very few discretionary accounts from which to reduce any further than we actually have over the last few years. So we continue to look for efficiencies, and we will continue to look for efficiencies and repurposing monies within the budget. Quite frankly, it's my belief anyway that any additional budget reductions will most likely have to come from personnel at this point. So, certified salaries. Those are Object Code 111. Now this is kind of my life. I drive everyone crazy about these codes because we follow U.S. Department of Education, NCES account structure, and most local and state accounting does follow this account code. You may recall a few years back when the state of Connecticut was working towards a uniform chart of accounts for all school districts. This mirrors the strands of account codes. So the object codes 111 are specifically for certified salaries. And as you can see, certified salaries cover a number of areas: teachers, administrators, teachers in different factions, and that is all outlined in your book. Most categories within this object code reflect contractual increases, which includes general wage increase and step increases where applicable. So you won't always see, for example, something being right at 2%. If that's what the union in general has received, it might be more, because we may have, for example, teachers that are newer who are moving a little bit more aggressively along the step schedule. A couple of things I just wanted to point out. Instructional tutor salary halfway there has a reduction. And on page 13 of your budget books, you will see that reflected at the high school level. And this is a result of the proposed reduction of 2 tutor positions as was presented in the superintendent's budget. Curriculum development salaries, I know there was some question about that. Here it's reflected as almost a 20% reduction. On page 15, in what we call key code, code 645, you will see there was a reduction. Again, that's the result of the proposed reduction for the STEM coordinator. And pupil support salaries, I'm sorry, I'm on an angle here, the third one down, fourth, is showing a slight increase, and you will see on page 16 where that fluctuates a little, and some of the ups and downs in that area is primarily a result of new staff moving into positions. They're union positions, so they do move differently at starting compared to someone perhaps who left who was earning slightly more. I know I've got you running all over your book, but I just wanted to highlight a few areas and we can get into more discussion. 112 are the non-certified salaries. That includes positions such as classroom instructional aides, nurses, secretaries, and custodians. And we did provide you with a complete list of all the positions that fall under that code in your book as well. Just again, a few areas I will bring to your attention. You will see special education, class instructional aid salaries increase significantly. We've been talking about this, a variety of reasons, more students moving in, more being identified, some actually needing one-to-ones. So when we set the budget for next year, we did add 5 new positions. I will tell you, we have at least 12 right now, also expensed to ESSER grants. So we need to monitor that very carefully as we move forward. And that's under the 112s in Key Code 0530, which is on the left side of your page there. Also, custodian overtime, you may just have picked up that there's no information for actuals for fiscal year 20. That's a result of us just pulling out the cost of overtime out of the custodian salaries where it used to be budgeted. When I arrived in fiscal year 20, I had a hard time analyzing that cost when it was mingled in. It took a lot of extra work. So we did separate it out, and as you can see, we have actual expenditures from last year, which of course, there wasn't a whole lot going on in schools last year, so it was a lot lower than usual. And we budgeted just based on the historical data that we have. And benefits actually paint a pretty good picture this time around, which is really a relief. As I said the other evening, this is usually a wild card. It's based on claims, and you really don't ever know where you're going to end up. So this was very helpful to the budget to have a reasonable increase in our renewal. You will see a couple of areas that went down. It's based on, again, new employees coming in at lower amounts. Our group life insurance reduced accordingly. Our unemployment compensation, last year we did increase that significantly because we did have quite a few positions that were reduced as well as those shifted to ESSER. Fortunately for us, the CARES Act was extended. We received a 50% credit through December, so that was incredibly helpful. We are optimistic that going back to the $125,000 historical amount will be adequate for next year. And obviously, areas like defined contribution and Social Security and Medicare will increase in accordance with the increases to salaries. And that's pretty much my presentation. So I will go back to all my notes over there. And if you have any questions, I'm more than happy to discuss them. And before we turn everything over to Dr. David.
Yeah, let's start with the first question. If we can go back to the slides to 111, please.
Sure. Thanks, Rita.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Got a couple questions here. So let's just start with, where was I? My first question was on the teacher salaries. So this year we budgeted 2020-21 to 39 million. How many, the open headcount that we have today, where are we with the, I guess we could start with the teachers, but I know that's probably the highest headcount, I would think, over administrators, but you correct me if I'm wrong.
I think if you're asking about the positions that are filled.
Correct, yeah, the unfilled positions that are budgeted.
We can definitely provide that information, and I'm not sure where you're leaning, but if we do analyze all these accounts, the encumbrances, as people leave, we adjust them. And Susan Nicholson and I have been working on an analysis. I mentioned it at the last meeting that we will be bringing a transfer to the board because there are savings there.
Okay.
But we will get that information for you.
And then obviously just not teachers, if there's administrative O92s out there that are, whatever the open head count is, because that's imperative for this year to know where we're going to be. Obviously we have special education costs going up, but with transfer money, but we want to see where we're going to be for next year as well. So.
Yeah, that's exactly what we're working on.
Thank
so we
you.
will provide that to you.
Questions for Pam? Mr. Hunter?
So I've noticed on the assistant principals and some of the schools we had significant jumps over the last couple of years. Is there higher than would be a pay raise? But
Most, if you're seeing increases, I can tell you the majority of them are step increases that is in accordance with their contract. Some, and we've actually had some reductions. I will point out Worcester, for example, and that was a change in the person in the position.
So if I'm looking at, like, say, Franklin, which is about a 30% increase, Lordship School, which is a large increase, I'm guessing that's Eli Whitney. So some of these are very significant increases.
I don't see a 30%. Am I looking? I'm on page 4. Where are you?
I'm on page 4, so it went from, in 2 years, with the adopted budget, it went from 102,000 to 131,000 in 2 years. About 15% per year.
I'll look
Ms.
into that.
Mancini?
Yes.
Mrs. Corcoran might be able to assist.
I actually looked into this, and I saw the same number, and I figured, and the SAA contract for 22-23, I believe there's like a step skip. It goes 1, 2, 4, 4. So they skip the third step. It looks like. Courtney
There's
can
a
probably speak
conversion
it up more.
chart, yeah, and the next year.
So there
In the
might be a
next
big
year.
jump if they're moving that in between,
Those two
basically
things.
skipping a step. I think, Courtney, you can probably confirm this, yeah.
Right, and the contract is online. If you look at the last year, the salary scale, there is a conversion for some of the staff, on a certain step.
Mr. Hunter, does that answer your question? Mr.
I guess as best as I can answer it, yeah.
Mr. Davey?
Yes, on the custodial overtime, is any of that monies reimbursed from the town? Because a lot of that is, whether it's, Sterling House using the building or other activities?
Yes, we send them a request for reimbursement based on who is using the facilities on a, I think, payroll period, bi-weekly basis, and I speak frequently with Amy Moore, so we do receive our reimbursement.
So out of that $540,000, how much are we getting?
That's net. We budget net.
That's net, okay, thank you.
Mrs. Mancini, I have a question. When looking at salaries, we can see coordinator positions for tech education, family and consumer science, music, arts, and physical education as cut in expenditures 20 to 21. But there's been no conversation regarding the coordinator of world language. I'm just curious as to the coordinator level position and the elimination of many. Has that ever been brought up for conversation?
I apologize, Amy, I'm not really clear on what you're asking.
Okay, so system account number 0186,
And what page are you on?
page 8.
Okay.
So page 8 and 9 list all coordinator positions.
Got it.
And you can see if you follow through the years, many of them were eliminated from our budget. We still have a word language coordinator, and I'm just curious as to the history there, to have that. Fine arts was cut, business was cut on page 7.
I think, first, I will say that the coordinator for fine arts, music, and PE is just in the ESSER grant currently, so
Okay.
that's why you're
So
not
it's not
seeing the
reflected?
budget here, so it's not cut. But you are correct, the family and consumer science was reduced, and I'm assuming someone correct me, the
It's the CTE.
technology was?
It's the CTE
That's CTE.
coordinator, some listed.
Okay, all right. So yes, that's the one position. And oftentimes you are going to see bits of a salary put in proper areas because it is split between different topics.
Thank you. Mrs. Lance?
Piggyback on that comment, this is for Linda. So if there's no longer a supervisor for, a coordinator, excuse me, a coordinator for technology or family consumer science, who do those teachers report to?
Each of the high schools, because most of those positions reside in the high schools. I know the Project Lead the Way is also at the middle school as well, which is part of that department. But each high school and each middle school has identified an assistant principal who is responsible for supervision of the teachers in that program. We have a lead teacher in each building for that department as well, who coordinate the department meetings and things like that, and funnel requests to the secretary, who still is managing all of their accounts and everything. Kevin Clemmy and I work together on the Perkins grant, and also providing for the needs for each of those programs. So it's sort of a team kind of approach.
So, I'm gonna hold my thought for later, but I do have another thought. Most of those, let me add this comment. Most of those coordinators that, positions that are not filled, those people retired, correct?
Well, I'm not sure which position you mean.
Technology and family consumer science. So we really didn't cut people's jobs when those were eliminated. It was because people retired and the position was open.
I think the only position that we're talking about is the coordinator for those departments.
Right.
Right, it wasn't specific teachers in the.
No, I'm talking about coordinators. So we did not eliminate a person's position when we eliminated that.
We did. That was last year. Yes.
Okay. But those, okay. I'm wrong then. Amy. So I guess my next question is, are there any other coordinator positions that could, I don't want to get my head cut off, that could be eliminated and to save money for the budget and have assistant principals pick up their positions to their coordinating their jobs?
I can take that. Yeah, I'll take that. That's a complex question to answer. And the reason why is because coordinator position comes with a very specific kind of expertise. And ultimately, from a supervisory standpoint and instructional leadership standpoint, in theory, APs could, but it would not be advisable. And There's a broader context to that in terms of the board aiming to meet certain academic goals that they set, as it's measured by the state and measured through different modalities, but ultimately, as these coordinated positions are typically unique to the secondary level, we need people with expertise to make sure that the dots are aligned so kids make progress and they dive deeply into their interests. It would not be best practice. From a superintendent standpoint, I would advise against touching those positions that I classify as unicorn positions, and those are rectified.
Thank you. And my one last question is, if we're eliminating a STEM position, will the other STEM coordinator pick up that job and be like K to 12 instead of, is that what the
That's
plan
most
is?
likely
I think that's what I was trying to get at.
scenario, yes. And that was the original configuration
Yes, it
of
was.
that position. Plus it balances out what's, the literacy position of K-12.
Oh, okay. Okay, thank you.
Correct.
David?
Yes, so let's go to the two FTEs that are proposed cuts at the high school, the teachers. So for 10 years, I've been hearing, I'll go to the superintendent, for 10 years, I've been hearing kids can't get electives, there's too many kids in study hall, they can't get into the classes they want, and now we're talking about, Stratford High, whatever the population is there, I don't even know at this point. I know we won't talk about the design of Stratford High. Everyone knows my feelings, I think, on this board, how we designed that school. But the bottom line is, we have kids in study hall right now that are trying to get into electives, and now we're trying to take electives away. The one thing I always caution the board, especially new board members, because I'm going to ask, well, look at the tab reports, right? And the tab reports can be very deceiving, right? Because sometimes kids can't get in schedules, transfer students and all that. Have we really looked at that? Because it's something, and I'm looking at you, the superintendent, because you're came right out of high school. You're just out of high school, right? No,
We got a couple more gray hairs than most high schools.
Yeah, I just came as a high school principal. So I just want your thoughts on this, because I know that's been a general complaint I've heard for 10 years, being part of finance, and maybe even 20 years, part of the board.
Yeah, no, I agree, Mr. David. I think that's a legitimate complaint, and I think our principals and conversations I've had, and conversations I've had with our teachers, that is a legitimate complaint. As I prefaced on Monday, the ideal situation would be to look at FTEs last. But as we all just saw from Ms. Bangini's presentation, any kind of reasonable reduction to our respectable budget, we have to consider that piece. So as somebody who has done this work at the high school level, and somebody who used to be a former school counselor, all I did was schedule. So one of the things that I think we have some opportunities, still not ideal, and our principals will tell you this, and as I shared with you all, as we went through this process, when we had some pain points around some conversation topics, as I met with Jack and Katie, this was the one, okay? We did share with them that it is the proposal form, that ultimately the board has to make a decision. But I do think that we can look at our master scheduling process, okay, to try to find efficiencies. And when we assign teaching loads, my position is to realize some opportunities there. That is kind of suspended in the vacuum right now as we go through the master scheduling process. Joanna and her team of counselors at both high schools are going through that process right now. So we're looking to see where the dust settles. And after we get that information, hopefully we can get that into the hands of the board so we can make an informed decision.
Yeah, and I'm just going to go on record really early out of this. I don't support any budget that is going to have a reduction of 2 full-time teachers at the high school, knowing the issues at the high school at this point. So that's just my position. Other board members can look at it other ways, but I think we need to do better for the high schools that way, because I just know there's a lot of, again, I have a 20 and 19-year-old, so I still have a lot of their friends are trying to get into classes, and they tell me the struggles of that. And I don't think it's the principal's fault. I don't think it's anybody's fault. It just is what it is. It's a numbers game at the end of the day. But I think we really, I'd rather have kids in classrooms and, in study hall, to be honest with you, because they have to be.
And there was that additional variable of the increased graduation rate, right? So Those are all moving variables that have to be in consideration. We're working with our supervisor for school counseling as to go through the scheduling process, and we should know more as they continue with that project.
Great, thank you so much.
I appreciate it, of course.
Mr. David, just for your reference, on page 139, you'll see the current numbers of our enrollment, and both high school numbers are there. Are there any other questions for Mrs. Mangini? Mr. Henry?
Yes, on page 11, last line item, teacher summer program. Over the last 2 years, we've had about a 60% increase. Can you explain that?
Where I'll start, and if I need some help, I know that Ms. Burgess is here. That's a special education summer program that we're required to provide. And like our special education population throughout the school year, it has increased for the summer program as well each year. So that's why you're seeing that increase.
To that extent, though, 60%?
Yeah, and Heather, I know you can add.
Yeah, we've got about 100 students that qualify for extended school year. So that's additional teachers, and some of those students need support staff, like CIAs, BTs, paraprofessionals, the program list that I sent you today. So all of those programs and all of those students qualify for extended school year. So we're required to provide that for them. And so the increase in enrollment, the increase in special education identification has also increased our ESY enrollment.
And that's not something that's going to sunset, you don't think?
No, not unless we come up with a different solution for, overall for special education. The numbers are high enough that that's about the right percentage of students receiving ESY services.
I'm guessing you might have some of those solutions?
We'll work on stuff.
Any other questions for Mrs. Mangini? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I would invite Dr. Gata up, please, to speak about curriculum budget.
So, I think it's appropriate when we start to talk about curriculum, teaching and learning, and professional development, that we remember that our conversation should remain student-centered. We should be also considering the support that we give our teachers who are working with our students. And then something we discussed last Thursday is how this little piece over here is supposed to show how we as a team within this conversation here work together. And the word should be on there too. I have to add the word to the next time my next iteration of this. But it's really important because as I go through this, some of the pieces I'm going to talk about you may not directly see on page 144, which is the piece that we're focusing on today, because they may reside in somebody else's budget. But it all overlaps. Okay, so when we're talking about programs, which is the first thing I would like to refer to, because we had several questions about student programs and the programs that we use in this district. So I would just like to take a few minutes. I'm saving my page till the end. Telling my story, and then we can look at the numbers. Okay? So these are some of the key programs that we use in our district. And I think that we were very thoughtful and careful in the programs that were selected because we looked at the needs that we had in our district. And I think the decisions that were made were very fortunate for us, especially during the last 18 months. Because many of these programs have been in place for at least that long, and they served us well during the COVID times that we had. So students would have access not only to their teachers, but to content. So Teachers College, many of you are familiar with Teachers College. It's a reading-writing program that provides teachers with tools to teach the elements of reading, 5 elements of reading, and authentic writing is used in teaching the elements of writing, along with grammar and spelling. The instructional model, many of you know the mini lesson at the beginning, which is the whole group lesson, then small group work and conferencing is part of that approach. use Teachers College in grades K through 8. Right? Sort of providing some literature and text in complementing the Teachers College model is Newsella. Newsella is an online program that we use in grades 3 through 12. It's a resource that contains 5 different levels of reading materials in English and in Spanish. The content is offered so that differentiation is built in. And in addition to that, teachers are able to personalize. So if there is a current event or a topic that a teacher wants to have a discussion about, in social studies, let's say, students are able to read about that content at their appropriate reading level so that they can participate in the conversation. Newsella's we've been using Newsella in the district probably for about 4 or 5 years now. There's been a change. Newsella does have a social studies component. This year we traded out the social studies component of Newsella for the Britannica launch packs, which will be used primarily at the high school level to support the social studies curriculum. It's one of the resources that the State Department has put up as a recommended resource to use for some of the new social studies courses that are coming out. So that sort of complements the literature piece, the science piece. There's science pieces in Newsella, as well as the social studies piece. Now, the next 3 items on the list for literacy are items that we use to help provide support for students, okay, and interventions. The first is Lexia, and it's actually available to students in grades K through 12. That access and license number was increased for next year so that we could also include special education students and multilingual students, or ELs. Lexia is used for decoding and comprehension, and specifically for students who may be in tier 2 or 3 for intervention. We have unlimited licenses for all 9 elementary schools, and this year we're making them available at the high school level as well. We have them at the middle level as well, but at the high school level. There's been discussion about students who are coming into high school. We want to make sure that they're prepared to work with high school material, and so this is a tool that our coordinator is working with the reading teachers at the high school, and some of the, again, another overlay, some of the professional development, professional learning that's coming up is related to working with the reading teachers at the secondary level as well to utilize and make the most of this resource. The Read 180 and System 44 are really a combined program. And it's been extended this year up into the high school, so this is a program we've had in place already, and there was a need for it at the high school level as well. So this was an extension. It's because of the increased need also at the high school, it's critical we have a systemic approach to reading, and additional licenses were added here. This will provide students and includes a written response to reading, so there's a writing component as well with a mini lesson in small group, very similar to what we're using, the approach that we're using at the elementary level. Next, I'm going to switch to mathematics. Many of you know that the Curriculum Associates Ready Mathematics is the program that we use, K through 8. And iReady is the formative, sort of the built-in formative and some summative assessments, the standardized assessment that's used along with the units in the iReady program. We do not pay separately for that. It's incorporated into the program, so it's not an additional cost. Those of you who were at the Curriculum Council last night or watched it when it was live streamed heard about the number corners that are being used at the kindergarten level and now moving up into first grade as well. This is a program that it was kind of neat. We had some of the math coaches on last night to talk a little bit about it. I've been hearing very positive things especially from kindergarten teachers, because that's what is being introduced this year. The numbers program works off of the classroom calendar, providing daily practice so that the mathematical concepts are presented in a way that are familiar to students and very concrete. So the strands include the calendar grid, the calendar collector, so they collect things every day of the week and the month, the students do. And the computational fluency and number line are also the days in school, the 100 days of school, all of that is part of this particular program. And finally, ST Math. I have to tell you, if you have never tried ST Math, you really, it is, I haven't made it out of kindergarten yet. Well, what is so unique about this program and very engaging is that language is not really part of the program. It's an animated system, and you have to look for patterns and things like that. And so ST Math is the program that works primarily on concepts and connects the ideas to the symbols, language, and discourse about mathematics. It uses visual learning, and students are better equipped to handle unfamiliar math problems and recognize patterns and build conceptual understanding. Because there are no language barriers, the problem is accessible to all students. It's master-based, so as you work through, not only do you look at the problem and try to work your way through it, you're given feedback also on the answers that you provide, so that you're able to use that feedback for the next level. The formative feedback shows students the mathematical consequences of each answer, so helping to form and shape their understanding. And then science, mystery science is a program that we've been using at the elementary level. We have a multi-year agreement with that company, and it will sunset at about the same time the Open SciEd program becomes available at the elementary level. So we're in good shape here. There's no cost in our budget for either of these two programs. They're both aligned very closely with the next generation science standards, NGSS, which uses more of an inquiry-based approach. The cost really in my budget for this is really about materials. For Open SciEd, it's for teacher professional development, but other than that, Open SciEd is an open source resource so that we don't have a cost for that. So when I look at another bucket for my budget, instructional supplies is one that comes up. Primarily in literacy, the instructional supplies are classroom books or access to other forms of literature, whether that be online or in a verbal sense, listening to stories. Mathematics, manipulatives, and the elementary student workbooks are the instructional supplies here. Primarily, the elementary workbooks are in the buildings budgets, not necessarily in mine. Usually, my office will do, if there's a full district or level adoption, we take that on for the first year, and then the schools know what they need to be able to, to have to replace those things, so they usually take the next step there. Finally, science lab materials. Okay, so this is mostly at the elementary level. The secondary schools have their own budget for this particular department, but what we're doing is providing science equipment or some things for the labs for the mystery science for the Open SciEd at the elementary level. Curriculum revision schedule for next year is in science and math area, particularly at the primary level, art and counseling at the elementary level. The secondary level, you can see physics, algebra, world language, counseling, art, health, social studies, and Open SciEd at the secondary level. and that's 7th and 8th grade. Open side. As far as professional learning, this is also in my budget. At the elementary level, there's going to be, also, I should say, at the middle school level as well, specific instruction on dyslexia, working with students who have dyslexia, specifically, most likely with reading teachers to begin with. The State Department is working on an upper elementary social studies curriculum. And we also will continue the Open SCIAD professional development, which has been going on for a couple of years. At the elementary level, it's only the 6th grade that does Open SCIAD. It's primarily a secondary program, because our 6th grades are in with the elementary. That's just the one grade level that is using the Open SCIAD program right now. At the secondary level, training for Open SCIAD. So once this training occurs with teachers, and it has been ongoing over the last year or two, once the training is completed, and we're pretty close to that, we have 1 or 2 more units, I think, at the middle school level, then we'll be, aside from materials for the labs and that, we'll be pretty much all set with that. SAT and AP training, and civil engineering and architecture, and that is a CTE course that one of our high school teachers is going to be trained on this summer. At the district level, we have art, music, PE, science, math, reading, counseling, and some of our coaches, etc., need to have their annual or their annual CPR and first aid certification. So that's something that's included in my budget. Okay, so this is page 144.
I think it's 131.
No, is it really? Did I get a new, the earlier version of the book? Sorry. What's on 144?
Nothing.
You just cut your whole budget. You don't want 131. Yeah, you want 131.
All right.
This is news.
Could you, I hope that you can see the overlap of, the instructional technology, obviously, people personnel, working with Yvonne, she's keeping us, we're having conversations about our curriculum, making sure that it's inclusive. We are always having conversations with Ed. In fact, Ed was so lucky to get some of our instructional technology into his budget, so you'll hear about it again as well. Thank you. No questions, right?
Dr. Gata, are you ready for questions and answers?
Yes.
Okay, so we will open it to questions for Dr. Gata. Mrs. Bedell?
Dr. Gata, the list of programs that were listed, the Teachers College, Newsella, are those annual subscription programs, or are they one-time paid programs, or?
Teachers colleges, yes, we contract with Teachers College if we're having professional development, but the ongoing piece in my budget, for the most part, is making sure that we have classroom libraries and things like that available. Also, the units that come out on a regular basis, we make sure that teachers have those as well. The thing I think, we noticed over the last couple of years is when, when COVID came in and students had to go home, we took a lot of the classroom library books and put them, into packages for students to take home and read. So we're working on rebuilding our classroom libraries, and I know our schools are helping us with that as well.
Just one more follow-up question. Since these programs were implemented, specifically Teachers College, Lexia, iReady, maybe STMath as well, has there been progress reports on those students that have used those from K through 12 or however long they've been used? Are we
Yeah.
seeing progress and?
We would love to go back and look at the Smarter Balanced scores, from several years ago. But we did start to see an upward trend, in our student performance. So, it was promising, and in the last, year and a half has been a challenge for us.
Thank you.
So what we're trying to do is to keep as many familiar things as possible, in place for students and for teachers, so that we can continue to get back into what they know and feel comfortable with.
Dr. Gita, I have a question. It's not so much one that I need an answer to, but in-service training at the secondary level, we see a big jump, nowhere near where probably it should be, but, or where it was in 2019. I was just curious what that increase is, per se.
So is it, it's in service and it's not professional development, right?
Right, in-service training in secondary.
So the thing with, the way the in-service is broken out is all elementary and secondary. So the secondary piece includes middle school as well as high school, and that reflects mostly the open SIAD training.
Okay. Thank you. Mrs. Carol Davies?
Okay, so I have a few questions, curriculum related. You were saying that Lexia and Read 180 System 44 are both being used at the middle and high school level?
They're available for use depending upon what the need is for the child.
So we're paying for licenses for Lexia at the middle and high school level, but also paying for the System 44, which is similar.
We had, depending upon what the need is, and again, because we are also using it with special ed students, as well as for our ELs, it's available. We, the agreement with Lexia, because we added a few licenses for Lexia, they gave us access in, throughout the district. It doesn't mean it's being used with all students or whatever, it's just that we have access should we need it.
All right, so we're not paying for those then?
No. Not for the widespread access to it, no. But we are paying for Lexia service, yes.
Right, okay. My other question, with Teachers College, you mentioned you're using the Readers and Writers Workshop.
Yes.
It also has a phonics component. Is that something that we
Yes.
use and that's included in that?
Yeah, I just didn't want to read all the pieces that.
That's okay.
But yes.
But, so with our curriculum, are we strictly using the Teachers College phonics program, or I know other people have mentioned to me I believe the Haggerty?
Oh, definitely.
So
Yes,
we're using both?
Haggerty has been added, yes. Yes, that was started last year. It was brought in last year. Yep. And there's a definite need for that as well. They wanted that to make sure that was shoring up some of the areas that they felt they needed, some resource in.
And then, I'm sorry,
One of the other things too is, we're going to be having the curriculum council meeting after this, next month. And that information, when we talk about SRBI, and that will be included in that as well.
Right. I just was wondering if it was possible to get like a description of the Haggerty phonics
Sure.
and the Teachers College phonics and see why both are needed if they're
Definitely.
a phonics program. It's kind of also my concern with like the Lexia plus the System 44. They're both phonics programs, and especially like at the high school level, I know Lexia is very elementary.
Yep.
And so I know it's a challenging thing for high school students to have to use something like that, where like the System 44 gives more of that older look to it. So I just didn't understand why both would be used if they're serving the same purpose and addressing the same needs.
So, there's been some discussion about the reading level of some high school students that, may, require a Lexia resource. And I don't want to Jack, we've had a conversation with what the high school students need, and there are some students who are, reading at a level that requires dyslexia. It is, yes, it is a younger level.
Right, but my question, I guess, is then, because isn't System 44, I know Read 180, the Read 180 program, and System 44 is another additional part of it, but it's kind of addressing those phonics needs, right?
Yep, but okay. But I'm sorry, I cut you off.
So my confusion, I guess, is if Lexia is addressing phonics needs, right? And System 4 is addressing phonics needs, why do we have both?
Well, dyslexia, I believe, is used for special ed students. And the System 44 and the Read 180 is used in the reading classes.
Okay. Questions? Go ahead. Sure. Can you tell me more? I'm not as familiar with the Britannica lunch packs. Can you just tell me a little bit more about that? I know you mentioned it's used as a resource for social studies.
Yes. Well, it's used because, the state has been, and actually Stratford is a pilot site also for the new Black African American, Puerto Rican Latino curriculum.
Right.
And so the state is not only working on trying to implement that program, but they're also developing a list of resources that go along that are specifically part of the units that have been developed. And that particular resource is the one that we're using, because it gives more resources than the New Zealand social studies piece is given.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
More questions for Dr. Gann?
I would never forgive me if I didn't ask. Can I ask you, how are we using ST Math in the classrooms? Because over the pandemic, when the kids were home, I could see the justified use of it, but how are we using it in the classrooms now that we're back in the building?
Students still have and it's built in over the classroom. Usually we try to have them exposed. The recommended time is 60 to 90 minutes per week, not per day, per week. So that is built in to a certain portion of the math program over the course of the week. And I believe there's also some, there's some at-home availability as well, and students are encouraged to use it there.
Mrs. Bedell?
Similarly to that question, Andrea, some of these programs, they're district-wide, but are the teachers using them in similar ways? Are we seeing the same use out of them? Because I feel like some are seeing different usage.
Yeah, and I think, you bring up a good point, because that is something that as a district, one of the things I haven't mentioned is the fact that we have spent a lot of time, and this over the last couple of years on social emotional learning. That's not even, it's unfortunate, but it's not even part of this discussion here, but as we worked on building that kind of learning environment for students by supporting them in those ways, we're now trying to, shift gears and have students focus. And I think it's just been something that's had to happen at the times. Some situations find themselves more challenging. And so, yes, not everybody's going to be in the same place at the same time. But our point is to have everybody to be working consistently. We have, as you may know, we have grade level meetings and department meetings every month. And at the elementary level, 1 month is literacy, the next month is mathematics. So teachers get together and talk about the programs that they're using and the curriculum that they're following. There have been a few adjustments that have had to be made, whether it be in looking at priority standards or, so things are still in flux. So until we can, make sure that we have everything in place to support students to be successful. But the expectation is that these programs are being used, and the math coaches are there, The reading teachers are there to help support teachers in implementing the programs.
Mr. David?
Yeah, and I just want to bring up one point. A lot of these programs that we have are for all the students, and I like to say that for all students. And when I look at this budget of, $200,000, I think of, if we don't offer some of these programs and some of these software to all students, we can have another outplacement of one student or two students, which is $150,000 per student. So when I look at the overall budget of $200,000, not a big number when you think if we have to, because we don't have the appropriate things for our special education students in-house, and we have to pay for two students to go down a bus and spend $300,000, that's a lot of money. So the efficiencies, we have to look at all of that. And we've went over this through the years and years, and I just want to kind of point that out. Yes, we could save a few dollars here, but when a parent comes to a meeting and say, hey, you don't have the software, let's go to another school over, we'll say Milestones in Milford, which is probably over $200,000 now. We don't want to go down that slippery slope. So.
Are there any other questions for Dr. Gaeta? Dr. Gaeta, I would just like to ask if it's possible. I know that there's been a lot of questions, like Mr. David said, about the parallels. Mrs. Carol Fabian brought up the efficiencies of program versus program. I'm sure that they have the opportunity for us to pull reports from, maybe the progression. Is there a way that you can report out, the effectiveness of such program to report to the board, just so that we know, in developing and bringing something like this into our classrooms where there's requirements for kids to do 60 to 90 minutes a week, that we're using the right one and that we see growth? Is that something that you can provide to us? Sure. Thank you. Other questions?
Yeah, like, just a reminder of what we're looking at next.
Thank you. Okay, well, if there's no other questions for Dr. Gaeta and nothing else to be addressed, I would entertain a motion to adjourn tonight's workshop at 7:26.
So moved.
Thank you very much. We'll see you next Wednesday, February 16th, same time, same place.